What's up, everybody? This is Jamal.
And this is Brandon, and this is The Way We Ball.
All right, everybody, welcome to This is the Way We Ball, episode 2. Brandon, we had a fun week since we've last been on. Today's episode, we are going to talk about the Montreal game. We're going to have a review of the Colorado game, talk about what's going on in Colorado, playoff positioning, and finish it off with I wouldn't call it breaking now, but finish it off with the news about the World Cup locations coming up. But before we get into business, let's talk playoffs. We're in the playoffs, baby. How are you feeling, Brandon?
Dude, absolutely stoked, man. After that Montreal game, I mean, hearts were broken, but then LAFC came in the clutch for us. So, first time in 5 years, man. Like, this is amazing. 8 out of 9 seasons of not being in the playoffs, and now finally we're there.
It just feels so good. Like everything has just been promises, right? Like we got the new GM, and I'm gonna promise to do this, and we're gonna try our best, and it's all just been promises. But like for me, I guess you could count the Open Cup as like that something you can hold on to. But for me, just the fact that we finally made playoffs, for me this is like the first sign of real progress. Even more so than the Open Cup. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, in terms of winning the Open Cup was incredible. For me, though, being a season ticket holder, producer Shay and I, we've been watching some really crap football for a couple of seasons now, and to actually see the team being competent. I mean, when we were starting to go and we were noticing like, wow, the passing's so much better. And then, wow, the play's so much better. And at first, it was just make the playoffs. Didn't matter if we were the 9 seed and snuck in. But then as the season started to progress, usually we hit that summer slide and then Dynamo just fall off the table. But this season, it didn't happen. So it was one of those things to actually see, like you've mentioned, the progression actually starting to come to fruition. Oh, my God, like it was so much better to see because now I actually have hope going forward. And if we can keep this team intact, then like we're going to be a legit threat going forward, especially now opening up DP slots too. Like there's really more hope on the horizon than anything else.
And that was a common theme we were hearing all year this year. Like, well, typical Dynamo, we start off strong and then we just fade away. And there was right before the Leagues Cup, right before that happened, it looked like we were getting a glimpse of that, where we were starting to kind of fall into this abyss of losing. But the Leagues Cup was the best thing that could have happened to this team. It just felt like the Leagues Cup, something happened there where we just turned it to a different level, and we haven't looked back since. And we never went into that downfall that we've been used to for so long.
Dude, I'm right there with you. I think with not only how we progressed through the Leagues Cup, but then even when we got knocked out, having that little bit of a break, I feel like that's like when the team really came together and we just started to make a serious push. Like, I think without the Leagues Cup, I don't know if we win the U.S. Open Cup, in all honesty, because that just made our team really start to gel. Coco took off during that time. Everybody seemed to start to play like Corey then became Scory Baird. I mean, he started to go out of his mind. And now it's to the point of where after watching what happened in Colorado, after going up to Montreal where we've struggled mightily and coming away with a point when we were 10 seconds away from winning that game, like it just now has hope to where I don't think we're just making the playoffs is good enough. Hosting a playoff game is good enough. This where it's like, if we don't really progress and make a run, I'll actually genuinely be upset, which is incredible to say considering where we were.
Yeah, no kidding. Well, I don't want to get ahead of myself because you're already touching on some topics that we'll get into here eventually. One last thing before we move on to the first segment. Who do you think benefited the most from that Leagues Cup? There's two names that stick out, I think, for every Dynamo fan, but who do you think benefited the most?
For Leagues Cup, though, that's man, that's really hard. I mean,
Not specific to Leagues Cup, but since Leagues Cup, who has been your bright
obviously
spot?
our defender, I mean, Griffin Dorsey was one that jumps out immediately. When he got put into the right back position, we took off. We were able to have like our wings be legit attackers. Steris was kind of holding down the fort when we were playing a lot more like 3 center backs. But with Dorsey being able to really push the pace up front, then it opened up Quiones on the other side of the pitch. Like it allowed Escobar to move up forward. Like it really did make us a lethal attack where before we were just defense. Like if we didn't get a PK, we weren't getting a goal.
Yeah, for me, it has to be Dorsey or Baird. It's one of those two. Baird just he just started finding the back of the net. I mean, we knew what we were getting from him, but he was finally starting to score. I'm with you though. I think I'm leaning towards Dorsey because Griffin Dorsey because Stairs was fine, but you were just getting a defender. There was going to be no
Yeah.
attack. He wasn't going to help Quinones and wasn't going to really free up our offense at all. So I think since Leagues Cup, Dorsey has really been that bright spot.
And Keonis as well, I think, is somebody else that we got to put into that contention as well, because with his speed, the way he just wears down the defenders, like it's one of those things, we're going to go down the right side with it, but dare you to stop it, like he just blazes past the defenders. And with him, Baird, and also Dorsey, like we literally took the next step in what we needed to do.
Yeah, I think I mentioned it like the last 2 3 games that I've been to in Houston. I try to take people who've never been before, and every time I take somebody, that's the first thing they've noticed is how fast Quinones is. Like even for someone who
Fly.
doesn't watch soccer, yeah, that guy just takes off. So, and he's only 19, 20. So once he really starts getting a little bit better on the ball, and that kid might even end up in Europe in the next 2 3 years. I think he's that
Dude,
good.
he could sell for a lot of cash if he keeps developing the way he does. He needs to develop his other foot because he is really one sided. But if he can do that and then also become a lethal scorer from that, cha-ching, man! Like we can cash in big with that guy.
No kidding. Well, let's move on. We've had our fun. Playoffs, here we come, baby. But let's move
Yeah.
on to the Montreal review. So give me your thoughts, Brandon. How did you feel about that game? What were your thoughts? Let's hear it.
Well, we talked about in the last pod that if we could get an early goal and then we could hang on strong and then not give up a late goal. And it kind of seemed like all that came to fruition. We got the early goal straight away. And then at the very end, with the last literally 10 seconds, they produced a wonder goal to make it equalize. I get all the fans being truly devastated. I was legit angry. Like I haven't been that mad after a match in a while. And what a great feeling, because usually when we go up to Montreal, we just get ran over. And even speaking of, more impressively, I didn't realize we didn't get in until 3 a.m. because of flight delays. And to play that well with like a BC squad that was like starting out there, because no Ache, he was out for a red card accumulation. And then we even started defenders in the back where it was like, whoa, we're really putting out a lot of guys to rest. Bear didn't play. Aliu was up front. He wasn't terrible. He had a moment where he probably should have put a goal away, but he just waited too long to take a touch. I was actually
But
most
isn't
impressed
that
with Seba.
I'm gonna cut you off right there. Isn't
Yeah.
that the Aliu story? Like he's not terrible. He just doesn't finish. And I feel like that's been the story all year. Like you see glimpses here and there. He has the strength, he has the speed. He just doesn't do the one thing we need him to do. And I felt like that Montreal game was like Aliu in a nutshell. Solid player.
I'm totally with you.
Yeah.
But he's also
Um,
not, he's under 22. I think that's what a lot of people forget. He looks like a man because he's humongous, but like he's still really young. And I think if he can develop a little bit more and he starts to put those goals away, I think he could be a legit MLS striker. I don't think he's good enough to like play in Europe or overseas or anything like that. But in terms of being a viable MLS striker, I could totally see him developing into one.
I know Asher will probably disagree with this, but Thor is pretty much done as a Dynamo, right? We can pretty much agree with that
So
after
that was
Montreal.
actually that report got put out, and apparently it was followed up with that wasn't necessarily true. But I'm still with you. I don't know if Thor does come back, which is kind of a bummer already because I like Thor. I think he's somebody that's still really raw, but what he can do with his headers, that's my biggest thing. After watching all of our matches, and especially in Montreal, corner after corner after corner, we do nothing with our corners. Like we don't ever really get any goals from those. And that was something that I'm like extremely frustrated with. Teenage is somebody, since he's come back, he's another viable threat inside the box. And then Thor, that speaking of, he's somebody with his height, and he's also amazing with the headers as well. That's the only reason why I'd really like to kind of put him in there is because we're no threat in the box. And that's a huge minus. We get all these corners, but I honestly don't know if we've produced a goal from a corner this season.
And I remember being very confident in our corners because we had Ache. Well, my theory was that you have Ache servicing, and I remember Sviatchenko coming in, and we were being sold that he was good in the air. So my theory was Sviatchenko, Hadebe with his height, and then Ache servicing them. Like I thought that was gonna be one of our strengths. But man, the corners we just have not done anything.
No, and with free kicks, totally different story. Ache is able to put them on goal and everything like that, and even Nelson had a great attempt as well. But like, it's it's frustrating because we're getting these attempts and to do what with it, and it's just it's missed opportunities, and especially when we're putting up like 15 corners a game and nothing is servitude from it, not even really much shots on goal. It's so frustrating to have to now it's a point of is it really even an advantage to get them? And so that's a huge struggle. But speaking of more players that kind of stood out, Seba to me was incredible in the 10 role. I thought he really kind of showed out. I mentioned before in our last pod that in terms of passing percentage, granted this was now game number 7 for him, he's actually our highest rated passer. And I think, dude, he's somebody that on the strike, like he puts in the effort. He's just got good vision. He's like that point guard that can like open up the field and really see people and pass around. That I think coming off the bench and coming in for Bossy or coming in for Coco, like I don't think we lose a step with him coming out.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. The first few games that we saw Seba in, I saw a lot of promise there. I didn't see any reason to not bring him to not give him another shot. And personally, I feel like every game he's been in, he's getting better and better. I think it was just him getting his legs under him, getting used to the heat. Now with this cooler weather we're getting in, I mean that's just going to benefit him. I saw a lot of optimism with him running the 10. I really enjoyed seeing him there, and like you said, I enjoyed his vision. I'm just thinking of him linked up with Ache. That's gonna be pretty exciting because he was with Caicedo, who's not the strongest offensive midfielder.
No.
And was it Coco that started as well, right?
Yeah, I'm trying to think of everybody because I'm going to get that in the Colorado match mixed up
Yeah.
because it was we had a different starting lineup. Caicedo was out there, um, Coco, and then no Bossy, no Ache. We played a lot of different. Aliu was up top, and then so was Seba, and then I think Nelson was up there too because he had an opportunity to on a break and he didn't put one in either. It was a frustrating day in terms of us shooting on goal that game. Like it was Corey when he subbed in for Aliu with the lower back injury, which thankfully wasn't anything bad for Aliu. He's perfectly fine. But Corey had an opportunity in the second half to put a goal in. He was right in the box, and then he was struggling. Thank God, in the Colorado game, he finally put one into the back of the net. But for a couple of games now, he was having a tough time. For me, the most frustrating part is during that Montreal game. So obviously now 4 of the last 5 games, we've given up a goal in the 87th minute or later, and most of those came in the 90th minute. St. Louis, Vancouver came in the 88th, then also Montreal in that 96th minute. Man, that was just it was a lucky goal. I wish we would have cleared it a little bit better, obviously out of the box, but I mean, what could you do? Clark had no opportunity to even put a save on that. The guy put in a brilliant shot. I mean, it was just everything went right. It was just a really gut wrenching goal, man. I was so angry.
Yeah, and on socials, you got a lot of people blaming other people. I saw some people blame Franco as well. At the end of the day, it was just a lucky bounce. I
Yeah.
couldn't. I remember that game ended, and I wasn't. I was devastated, but I wasn't angry at anybody. I felt like everyone did their job, and some days, the ball just bounces your way, and that was a specific example of that.
No, 100%. I wasn't angry at anybody. I was more just angry at the fact that it was like that game was ours. We outplayed them with guys resting. And I mean, that first half with that lineup that we had out there, like we owned the match. And then second half came around. We kind of seemed like we parked the bus a little bit, which again, I understand. We were probably exhausted, just being tired and also trying to rest as much as we could. And for that to break, and then what made it frustrating is because all we had to do was win and we were in the playoffs. But luckily for us, LAFC took care of business, dominating Minnesota United later that night 5-1. So like we still clinched playoff spot. So it was all good in the end. But it would have been nice to have those 3 points because right now we would have been sitting top 3.
We'd be really comfortable right now. Before we move on from that game, what were your thoughts on Bartlow back there?
So I'm a big fan of Bartlow. I think he's somebody that, in terms of where he's come from, him and Mikael, I didn't have much expectations coming into this season, but they've stepped up tremendously. To me, Bartlow is somebody that if we can develop him, I mean, I know this sounds ridiculous, but if he can keep getting better, it wouldn't shock me if he ever got a call up to the national squad. Like, I mean, I don't think he's going to make World Cup squad, but I could see him making a friendly. Like, I think he's that serviceable to where he can really kind of develop into something. He's good with his headers in terms of what on the box. He does make that occasional mistake where he doesn't necessarily mark the guy, but for the most part, I if he's starting, I trust him. Like there's no, I don't think we falter with him in the lineup.
Yeah, with Barlow, I think you're just going to have a bunch of growing pains. But yeah, I see a lot of promise there. That back line looked solid with him and Teenage back there. The one thing I love about this year's squad as opposed to last year, when you have these B C team squads out there on the field, you don't the leap doesn't feel that big of a
No,
step back as opposed to years prior. Like I'm very critical on Pat specifically, and he's done a solid job of building not only a competitive team but a deep team.
yeah,
And again, me being the pessimist I am, I would always say, well, look where he started. It wasn't too hard to go up from where we started from, but he has done a solid job, especially in the back line. And maybe that's because he was a keeper and he knows how to build from the back up. But um, that back line, I feel whether it's Mikael, Bartlow, Teenage, Sviatchenko, even Steris sometimes, like I feel like we have a solid back line no matter who is back there.
I would argue that our back line is the best in MLS. Like I think with our depth and not only our play, to me it's what it's the engine that kind of fuels us for a lot of the ways. Like without that back line, this team would struggle mightily. But we have such a deep back line. Our midfield is obviously the cream of the crop. But if one of those guys were to go down, that's where I'm a little bit scared. That we're a little bit thin because yes, Caicedo off the bench is fine, but then after that, it gets like, do we try to out Brooklyn Reigns? Do we try to make Brad Smith play out of position? Like you start to really kind of struggle a little bit outside of Caicedo because then you'd have to move Bossy out of the wing. You'd have to move Coco out of like kind of the counter-attacking mid. I mean, yes, we have four, but and then five would make Caicedo. But if any of those get injured, like that's a scary moment for us. So like we can't pick up any reds, we can't pick up any accumulation going forward, especially in like playoff time. And yeah, like Artur is definitely irreplaceable. To me, he's the MVP of this team.
The good thing about that, I feel like we're slowly building, right? So I feel like this last year we've pretty much solidified that back line. Another exciting thing about that is that both those guys that we mentioned, Bartlow and Mikael, they're only 23, and CB or center backs have a long shelf life in soccer. So, in my opinion, I think that the grand scheme was to slowly build the lower third, the midfield, and then the attack, in whichever order. But I feel like our back line is pretty much settled for a few years to come now. Next year we'll worry about the midfield because I mean there we are you get pretty old pretty fast. You have Ache Ache who's in his 30s, Artur who's also in his 30s, and Caicedo I want to say who's either late 20s or early 30s. So I think that's going to be
Well,
something that
so
we really focus on next year as far as the bench.
yeah,
And
and
Coco
Coco could be going international. But looking at our back line, kind of jumping ahead, would you sell anybody?
in the back line.
Yeah. Because I mean, if you think about it, right now, you might get more. I mean, you could probably get a lot on the dollar for Bartlow and Mikael, considering the leap that they've made. But I mean, they are, in terms of relative of their contract, cheap. So that means maybe we could sell Teenage and then open up a DP slot. Or I don't want to get rid of Setchenko, but again, if we can get top dollar, do you think about it?
Yeah, I think as far as selling, we're going to get the best bang for our buck with either Bartlow or Mikael just because of the age. I don't think too many teams are going to pay a pretty penny for someone like Sviatchenko just because of the age.
Yeah.
I would sell Teenage. I'm going to take an old wrestling saying, $1 million man, everybody has a price. So I would, yeah, I'd be totally fine with selling those guys, especially if it was out of MLS. I'd be totally fine with that. I think we can make a really good penny off of them. I think our days are numbered with Coco. Speaking of selling folks, I think he's going to be the one that will make a decent payday from. But if we get a decent payday from him and then do the same with one of those center backs, that's a lot of cash to build your team out with
Yeah.
next year.
And Sebas Ferreira, he's still on loan, so technically we could get rid of that contract. You would get rid of Ivan Franco's contract. Like we could actually have an influx of money coming in at the end of the season just by getting rid of some guys that we don't necessarily need or parts of the team that is really deep and start to build out that midfield and also maybe another attack as well up top because we are going to need that going forward.
Yeah, so that's definitely something to look into. I'd be totally fine. Preferably, no, I wouldn't want to sell them, but if we had to, I'd be very, very much okay with that. So
I
let's
agree.
switch on over to uh, more positive things. Let's talk about that Colorado Rapids match. 5-1.
Dominance.
The good guys dominated. Brandon, before we even get into it and dig into that, what was your favorite goal from that match?
The passing was insane. Shay and I obviously were there at the match. I, the goal where I would say where it was Baird, or not Baird, my apologies, Dorsey, where he crosses it across goal to an easy tap in for Nelson because the setup to that play was just tic tac toe all the way through. And when we put that one in, it was like, oh, this is going to be a night, man. Like you could just feel that we were going to run it up. And not only that, that starting lineup, that needs to be our playoff lineup. That was just, we looked fast. We looked like world beaters out there, man. Like that first half, nobody could have taken us down. That was such a just brilliant team effort. What about you? What was your favorite goal?
The same. I think universally that was everyone's favorite. I felt like socials, it was getting a lot of hits. I know the Dynamo account had shared it and talked about. I forgot what was the subtitle they used, but yeah, I mean, it kind of just showed. I feel like that was a glimpse of what this whole project is about: is having team ball, midfielders that can pass. Um, and yeah, I mean, I just for me that was definitely my favorite. It kind of showed what this team can be when they're hitting on all cylinders.
An
Um,
underrated goal was Corey Baird's because that angle he had to put that into the far corner was like that's something that could have been like the keeper would have had to made a brilliant save, but his window to put that in was spectacularly hit. Like I gave it up for Corey on that one. When I watched the replay again, because obviously in the moment I'm just cheering because the ball went in, but like when I replayed it and I saw it, he had an angle for that was a very difficult one, and he put it in beautifully.
it was all right.
I'm telling you, man, you got to look back on that with the goalie creeping in on him. There's not much room for him to put it in. Keone's had one outside of the box, like that one. I think took a nice little hop for him there past the keeper. So like that was just like, oh god, it went in. But Corey's is I got to give it up to him on that one. I'm telling you, man. If you look back on that, that's one usually he puts into the keeper, and for him to put that into the net, he needed that.
As they say, even a blind squirrel gets a nut. So I'll leave that
And
there.
I did too.
I was, I was happy that our tour got his in. So,
2-2 games,
uh,
baby.
yeah, there you go. I love seeing the defenders get some love, man. He more than anyone else deserves it. So, going back to that lineup, you would start Mikhail then over anybody else in that back line next to Sviatchenko.
Just because I think he's earned it. I like. Don't get me wrong. I think teenage has, man, to say a higher ceiling is tough to say. Like, I trust teenage to get us a goal, but I also think teenage causes a big mistake as well. But saying that, I mean, Mikhail did cost us in the League Cup where he went to pass it back to Clark and he put it into our own net. So, but that's literally kind of like been his one biggest mistake besides when we put him out on the wing. But yeah, I think I would go with exactly what we had, where we had Escobar and Dorsey on the wings, Svetchenko, and then Mikhail in the center, and then going out, building out in the mid with our strongest one of Coco, Artur, Ache, and then Bassi, Quiones, and Baird up front. Like that's a lethal threat.
Yeah, I agree with you. I'm totally fine with Mikhail getting that starting spot. I felt like the time that Teenage had off with his injury, the team really kind of gelled and the chemistry's there with that back line. So I'm totally cool with him starting. I agree with you. And I also feel like because we're gonna have to do something with that Teenage contract. I don't like having him as a DP. So whether we sell him or whatever we end up doing with him, that's going to soften the blow having Mikhail back there. So
Yeah, I need to learn more about how the contracts and money works in MLS because I'm not sure when you can like buy a player down out of a DP slot. Because if we can buy teenage out of that, I would totally do that to free up a spot. I want to keep him around because I think he's like a lifeline, like in terms of like a heartbeat to the team. Him and Bossy, you can tell everybody enjoys him. Like that, I think that's something that's very underrated about this team is the chemistry that they have in terms of like enjoying each other's company. It's not a situation where a lot of the times in professional sports, you'll see guys just collecting checks and they play with each other, but they don't necessarily like each other. I feel like this team genuinely hangs out and enjoys each other's company. And that's why I think that's going to be an underrated aspect when you go into the playoffs because they're going to be playing for each other. They're going to really be going that extra mile.
I mean, you don't have to look too far to see something like that. If you look at the Houston Rockets the last 2 or 3 years, I feel like that those teams, they were all just collecting paychecks. I don't really think anyone really got along with one another outside of the court. So I agree with you there. You don't really feel that way with this current Dynamo. They all seem to have each other's back. I remember I was kind of concerned about that the first game of the season when what's his name, the left back had gotten checked and he hurt his shoulder.
Oh,
Um,
Tate Schmidt.
Tate, yeah, I remember being kind of triggered that nobody went out to like defend him, like, and I'm used to El Tri H like being a menace, getting under everyone's skin, and I was like, dude, where the hell is that guy? Like, where's the H that I hate when it comes to national team play?
Yeah.
And I was really bummed out that that didn't happen. I don't know what's happened from that first game to today. If that happened today, I don't think that's going unnoticed.
Oh,
Escobar,
Escobar would burn the
Artur,
stadium down.
yeah, exactly. So I don't know what Ben did behind closed doors, but whatever he did, it's working. These guys all seem to be playing for each other, playing for the crest, and it's just really fun to see. And at the end of the day, you're seeing the results on the field.
I mean, it was obvious in the Colorado match. That first half was probably outside of the U.S. Cup final was probably our best half I've seen us play all year. I mean, 4 goals against a bottom team, like yeah, but at the same time, the way they did it was just tic tac toe, not multiple scores. Like it was just so beautiful to watch. Second half, yeah, we coasted a little bit, but still, Artur making it 5-1, I think was nice to kind of put in that extra goal and a late goal too, 84th minute where he scored on that one. So that was nice to see. I think we needed that as well. But after the match was probably the best part. I know that wasn't something that's going to be put on television, but Ben took the mic, thanked the fans as well, and then Ache took the mic and he spoke to us as well. And then Steve Clark had a very brief words, but it was essentially just to kind of rile everybody up to get us out there for the playoffs. I mean, even Ben was like, we're going to host a playoff. We're going to pack the stadium. Like you could tell that was an emphasis, not only through the coach, but players as well. Like they thanked the supporters for coming out all season. He mentioned that we were a big part of it, but a big part was to like, we need to pack this place. And I don't like, obviously, yeah, I want that as a fan, but more so for this team. Like for the first time, this is a team that deserves for us to come out and support them. Like they went out, won the cup final. Now they're actually going to be hosting a playoff game. Like what more do we really want? You know, like there's an opportunity for us to win the league. Like we can actually win the MLS Cup. That's not
But
ridiculous to
Brandon,
say.
it's too hot inside of Shell Energy Stadium. That's why people don't come out. The hell out of here.
Yeah, which
The
is,
weather has been
I
perfect.
mean,
There's literally no excuse.
yes,
It's and that's something that I really want to dive into in the off season when we don't have any games. But there's just so many marketing opportunities for this club. I don't buy that it's too hot, and yeah, like this is a fun
same.
team. People just don't know about it. Unfortunately, if you're not invested into the Dynamo, if you're not keeping up on their socials, if you're just a casual sports fan in general, you're not going to know what's happening down the street at Shell Energy Stadium. So I hope they do something big for this playoff push once we decide exactly who we're playing and when we're playing them. I mean, imagine LA here. I'm having a brain fart, but Ache and their Mexican player, like I
Carlos
know
Vela.
what Carlos Vela. Yeah, I know what the Dynamo fan base is capable of, and Shell Energy packed with those L3 fans and just those Central American fans that show up to those national games, like we would have a crazy home field advantage. They just we're getting into it, and I want to say that for a later date. But yeah, I'm excited to see who we end up with, which I guess we can transition to playoff positioning. So second through fourth gets us home field advantage. Where do you see us finishing? Do you have a preference as far as who you want to play? Let me get your thoughts.
So currently we're sitting fourth. We're a point ahead of Vancouver. Um, the way it goes, I believe, so 8 and 9 play
Wild card.
Shay just saved me. My laptop was dying, and he came in with a charger, so that was huge. We were communicating kind of off screen about that. But so the way it goes is 8 and 9 have a 1 card playoff against each other, and then so whoever wins between that. So we'll say FC Dallas, Frisco over San Jose. So then they would play the one St. Louis. 2 would play Portland, 3 would play Real Salt Lake, and then we would host Vancouver, which I'm okay with because last time Vancouver came in, we trounced 4-1. I think as long as we don't go to Vancouver, because when we went there, we got absolutely demolished. So if they can come to us, I feel good about that, especially because in October it's going to be a lot colder in Vancouver than it is going to be here in Houston. So I mean, the weather will still be nice, but it won't be that nice compared to what it is up there. So I'm okay with that. I prefer us honestly playing Vancouver. I don't want us to have to face off. If we go up to second, I I don't want to play Portland. I know we play Portland at the end of the season, but I think that's a bad look, I guess, or bad optics, having to play the same team twice. Because I think then you kind of get a feel for how they kind of run their motions. You get a better game plan for it. I think we're a team that is going to make a run in this as long as we can face off against somebody that we haven't seen in a little while.
So I'm gonna not necessarily disagree with you there, but the only team that really worries me is Seattle, just because of our history there. We've never won in Seattle. Portland, they're not ideal, but I'm okay with them. Seattle is the one team that scares me, and what scares me about them is that I feel like on the field we're better. It's just that
Yeah.
there's that mental like block right there that you just can't. We can't get over that hump of beating them in Seattle. So, um,
So technically, you're right because the statistics of what you're talking about bear out. In terms of Portland this season, their goal differential is -10. They've given up 55 goals. Seattle, in terms of the playoff teams right now, has given up the least amount of goals at 32. So, like, I agree with you on that one. I think that's a situation where they're actually playing a little bit better right now. So I'm with you. I think Seattle's a scary place to go. But I mean, looking at this, I mean, if we win, we go to St. Louis. I fear their fans because they really show out. The only thing that we'd have a leg up on is they've never, we mentioned this last pod, they've never done it before. This is their first time doing that. We did have success when we went into LA. We came away with a win this season at both LA Galaxy and LAFC this season. So, like, it can look, you might be right, man. Seattle might be the scariest place that we might have to go to, especially come playoffs.
yeah, and we said it before. Look, I know St. Louis is a good squad. They have the points. Um, I just they don't scare me, and I don't know if it's because we've never really been there before. For the playoffs, we don't know what that's going to look like, a playoff atmosphere in St. Louis. Did I say Seattle or St. Louis? Anyway, um,
No.
I'm more terrified of Seattle than I am St. Louis. And again, it's just weird how sports works. How sports works, especially when it comes to these little superstitions and Seattle just has our number in Seattle, and I'm terrified.
So
That's the one team I do not want.
to kind of put you on the spot, who would you say needs to be our biggest player going into the playoffs? Like, who needs to show up every single game for us to come away with W's?
I feel like this team. Well, I mean, it depends who we go against, right? It's going to be someone in the midfield, either Ache Ache or Artur.
See, I think that's like I think to me, they're going to show up no matter what. I think those two are just so good that, yes, obviously we need them to play well. But for me, I think it has to be Corey. I think if Corey doesn't score goals, That's scary. And you know what? I might even also throw Quinones in there as well, because when he's able to really produce on that wing, we're a totally different team. When he was out, like for instance, when he's out and it's like Brad Smith up there or Franco, like we just look slow. We look like teams can catch up to us, and it's a problem. During the Frisco match, when Quinones didn't start up there, and it was Smith and Franco, again, like when he came on in that second half, we made a massive jump. As much as I want to say, like, hey, Coco's the guy to do this, not necessarily. To me, Coco's passing rate, I mentioned before, it's the worst in terms of our starters. He's in the high 70s, where everybody else is in 80s, high 80s into the 90s. He also hasn't really produced much goals too. I think for in this case, we have to have somebody who's going to put in the back of the net, because I don't think we're going to give up any goals. My thing is we need somebody to score, whether that's Keonis or Baird. I think that is like the biggest factor going in.
So when I was thinking about it, I was thinking Baird, just because we do need those goals in. But I feel like you have Quinones, who I'm starting to get confidence in. You have Bossy. So I don't know if I would put all the pressure on Baird. For me, it's like if Ache for one reason or another has an off day, that scares me, because I just feel like him being the captain, he's kind of the heart and soul of the team. If he has an off day, what's that going to do to a 20-year-old Quinones or a 22-year-old Mikael? Like, I feel like everyone kind of looks up to him on the pitch, and so, I mean, he's a professional. He's done this before, and I think he's going to be okay. But gun in my head, I would say he's the most
I
important.
fear Artur having a bad game more so than Ache, because like I think the way Artur is able to kind of clean up that back midfield allows for Ache to be a little bit more cheeky with what he does, like the little bit of moves, crossing across field. Like it allows for him to have a mistake or two. But if they start to get back there, then we're really relying on Svetchenko to make sure everybody's marked, which he's brilliant at doing. If you ever take a moment and like you're watching a live match, if you just watch him communicate with that back line, there's a reason why that guy came from Europe. Like his communication is so good about making sure everybody's in line, that's such an underrated thing, that's why I'm saying more of the pressure definitely needs to be on our goal scorers. Whether it's Bossy finally taking a shot on goal, like he's just Mr. I want to set up the perfect alley-oop, which is great, and he's amazing at it. But I want him to take more shots, because there's moments where it's like, man, you have the angle, like put it out there. Like if you miss, you miss. But I would rather you take a shot than us miss the opportunity.
Yeah, I agree with you there, Bossy. I get what he's trying to do, but sometimes it's just like, dude, be selfish, go for it, let it
Yes,
rip. Um,
100%.
yeah,
I think he's earned
the
it.
yeah, 100%. I mean, we had mentioned it after that FC Dallas game. I feel like playoffs is when teams typically hunker down, and yeah, we are going to need some big games from the attack. So we'll see. I'm excited to see who we play, when we play. Tickets. So last I heard, tickets are on sale. I went on to the Dynamo site. While there's not a specific link for you to click on to buy them, you can fill out an inquiry form, and let them know whether you're a season ticket holder or not. And then from there, they will reach out to you to purchase playoff tickets. So, fans, whether you're a season ticket member or not, let's pack Shell Energy Stadium. Houston is back to being a playoff city, whether it's baseball, soccer. We're back in the playoffs, baby. So, Dynamo fans, go to HoustonDynamo.com and fill out that form and get yourself some tickets,
Yeah,
because
and
these
don't
guys
let the
deserve it.
Astros be an excuse. That's the other thing. Like they've had their moment in the sun. They keep doing it. Like they're going to be there. We need to show love right now for the Dynamo, because this might be our only home playoff game that we get to host this run. So like we got to make sure that we pack the house, and that way when we go on the road, it's just going to put that much more emphasis.
No kidding. And idea from Shay, ticket reps, hit us up. Give us a discount code to send out to the listeners.
Yep.
Love the idea. At the end of the day, we want this thing to thrive. We want this thing to succeed. So all we can do to help pack up Shell Energy Stadium, we are more than willing to. Um, so before we wrap everything up, let's talk the latest news we heard on the
30.
2026, 2030 World Cup. You want to let everybody know the news we heard?
Yeah, apparently FIFA is just saying screw it, everybody gets one. So they accepted a joint bid from Morocco, Portugal, and Spain. They're officially hosting the tournament, while there's going to be 3 games in Argentina, Paraguay, and Uruguay. So I don't know how that's going to work. Like the travel on that is going to be insane. Now, it's also setting up a window to where then the 2034 World Cup is going to go to Saudi. Now, what's interesting about that is you before had to have, I think, like 7 viable stadiums for you to host the World Cup. If you need to see it, go look at Brazil. They got one in the Amazon that's overgrown right now. And apparently they're going to waive that for the Saudi 2034 World Cup. So at this point, I don't know what it is that their plan is with all these World Cup matches. 2030 is going to be wild. I guess like if you want to go, you can, because my gosh, it's in almost every part of the world.
It's so frustrating because after everything that happened in Qatar, you would have assumed that FIFA would have had a magnifying glass over it and people would have looked into things like this, but it just smells of corruption. It just smells
Yes.
like it's coming around full circle. More than the Saudi thing, like I get it, they're pumping crazy money right now with these Saudi owned clubs. Whatever, they're gonna get it. Money talks at the end of the day. What frustrates me more than anything is this crazy idea about having half of the World Cup in South America, the other half in Spain and Portugal. Like, just let's say the U.S. is playing. I'm going to be extremely upset if the USA has to play in Uruguay while our next opponent is already in Europe training, getting ready, that we're going to have to fly over
Fly
there.
over there.
And there's just, it's not equal. It's not fair. I mean, I'm sure they're going to come up with some kind of idea to try to make it fair across the tables, but traveling's a
No, you're
pain in the ass, man. Just even just being on the plane, like it's tiresome. It takes a toll. It's just not fair. I don't care which way you look at it. It's just not going to be a fair advantage for anybody. So
because you're exactly right. My idea is like, okay, so they're probably going to have to devise this where half of the teams are playing on one side of like the world while the other half are playing in the other. But then once you get down to the final like 8, like then what? Are we all just going to, okay, you 4 hop on a plane and now you're going to go over there in Spain and Portugal to play this out? Like, you're exactly right. Somebody's going to get an advantage out of this. And then on top of that, it's going to be also a ticket advantage, because you know how much easier it would be for you and I to say like, oh, wow, the U.S. just drew matches where they're only going to have to play in Spain and Portugal. Sweet. Now we can get a hotel for an X amount of days, right? Rather than if like, oh, okay, in this match we got to go to Paraguay, and then we got to jump on a bird and go over to Morocco. Like, it's just insane in terms of how you're doing these bids. I don't understand why we can't give it to nations that already have stadiums built out. Like, if you think about it in terms of the US, our collegiate stadiums alone could host multiple World Cups. The same thing could be said I mean, you could do it in China. How many Olympics have they now hosted? If you want to host it in Europe, that's fine. It's really easy to travel around by train, but then host it throughout Europe. Do it in Spain, do it in Portugal, but then also do it in Germany, do it in Switzerland. Like, make it to where you can literally just travel by plane or by train, my apologies, and not have to take an international flight across seas. Like, that's where you lose me. That's where I think it's purely corruption at this point. Like, I do not get what they're trying to do. And do all these nations now automatically qualify? Because like, for instance, 2026 is in the US, so we don't have to necessarily qualify for the World Cup because we're hosting. So does that now mean that 6 nations have automatically qualified? That's absurd to me.
the state of Texas is more
Yeah.
able to
High
host a World
school.
Cup than Saudi Arabia is. Like,
Yeah.
even like the Canada US Mexico bid, my whole thing is time zones. Like, it's it's an hour difference time zones. Like, dude,
Yeah.
Europe to South America, like the sun isn't even setting in one place and you're going to be having the World Cup there. It just made no sense. And I loved when I first heard that Uruguay and Argentina, and I forgot who the third one was hosting, cuz I was like,
Paraguay.
okay, like the 100 year anniversary, this is where it all started. Like, I get that. And then you're hearing, well, like, well, we don't the whole economic issues that are going down in South America right now. So then it's like, why even like
Why
tease
do
it,
it?
or why even do it? Yeah,
Exactly.
like
To me, it's just, and there's a reason why FIFA also moved their headquarters to Miami, a notorious city allowing for corruption. Like, it's just more things that they're doing to feed their pockets that's absolutely driving me nuts. Like, this is an instance now where then, okay, like you mentioned, yes, 2034 probably going to Saudi is something that we can foreseeably see. But does that mean now we have to have another Winter World Cup? Because that kind of sucked having to take a massive break and then going back into league play for a lot of, I mean, you and I are Liverpool fans, and I hated that. To me, it just, it doesn't make sense. This is an easy layup for you to host it in places that are easily traveled. Like this, if you're having to go across seas, this is ridiculous. Like, granted, this one in North America is, I understand it, but you're still going to have to take a plane around from Canada to Mexico and the United States because our train system over here sucks. So, like, you can't do that. And you can't necessarily really drive those either because that's going to take a year and a life just to get to one place to the other. So, like, it's not that easily travelable here. Granted, yeah, you can hop on a Southwest flight and go there, that, this, and the third, but I'm just sick and tired of watching places that are not able to hold these World Cup nations. Now you're putting so much strain financially on all these countries that don't need it. Like you mentioned, South America is having a lot of instances in Venezuela, etc., where they're having turmoil. So why even then entertain the idea? To me, it just screams corruption. You're not helping. Like, that's the one thing.
Well, I guess to end it on a positive note,
2026 champions, baby.
no kidding. We have a week off, international break, and we end the season with a match against
Portland.
Portland.
We go to Portland.
To Portland. If you're Ben, are you putting that A team back out there? Are you fighting for playoff positioning? Are you just trying to get out of it healthy and letting the cookie crumble the way it does? What are your thoughts?
So with one match remaining, let's say everything breaks our way, we can go as high as tying LAFC for second, because LAFC is at 51, we're at 48. But we can go as low as, looking at the standings here, as sixth. Real Salt Lake is at 46. Now, Portland is going to be guns blazing because they can go as, they're sitting seventh right now at 43, but they can slide all the way back to 11th. Minnesota at 41. So, like, that bottom from 7 to 11 is just 2 points. So that's going to be a dogfight. So I expect Portland to come out really, really gunning for us. If we get the 6th seed, then I don't think we get to host, right? So you have to finish in top 4. So I think you have to put out an A squad, but if you can get a lead or if it's 0-0, then I think you make those substitutions.
And speaking of hosting, just to remind folks, so now with the new MLS playoff format, the first round is going to be a best of 3. So we will have a playoff game. We just might not have home field advantage. So it'll be
exactly
the first home game will go to the higher seed. The next game would go to the other team, and then it goes back to the higher seed for the third and decisive game. So we will have a playoff match in Houston. Right now, we're just trying to figure out if we'll have that home field advantage or not. We're already going to have a week off. I don't want to go into the playoffs with a team that's cold. I would put the starters out there that you're intending on playing for the playoffs, at least for a half. Just let them get some playing time, let them get loose a little bit, and then go from there. Give Portland a good run for their money, and I definitely would not park the bus, but I definitely would not put in the B or C squad. I think these guys need to loosen up.
And also, if we can knock Portland out of the playoffs, like, I want that because they're somebody that has been tested and tried throughout, like, their entire tenure in MLS. Like, going to Providence Park is something that is a legit home field advantage. So if we can knock them out and move somebody else, like, I'm okay with that.
So I have my answer. We have that notorious shot of Mauro Manotas in front of a Portland crowd getting flicked off and whatnot thrown at him. If that picture was supposed to be recreated, what current Dynamo player is going to be posing like that, getting crap thrown at them, flicked off? Who would you see recreating that shot?
I want it to be Bossy shooting the arrow and just seeing nothing but just beers and just anger from everybody especially because he's got the biggest smile I've ever seen in my life. I would love nothing more than that.
That's exactly where my head was. I could just picture Bossy scoring, running straight to that wall, and then doing his arrow. And yeah, just getting it from those fans. So that'd be awesome to see that again. Well, Brandon, it looks like time is about up. Any last words before we wrap everything up here?
Just bring on Portland, baby.
Bring on Portland. Bring on the playoffs. We'll see you next week for another episode of The Way We Ball. I'm Jamal.
I'm Brandon, and this is the way we ball.